All right, guys. Welcome back to the Family Science Podcast. And we've got the champion of the year, Kahl Harmon. Kahl, thank you very much for coming on and making some time for us.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me on, Mike.
So, uh, I'll get right into it, man. You've been shooting good for a while, but the end of your season was just unreal. And one of the things that I thought was really cool, your speech at the finale, you said that um, a lot of people don't realize the work and the dedication that it takes to get to where to accomplish what you accomplish. And you said something about doing like dot drills at night with flashlights.
Yeah.
Tell me, tell me about that.
So it kind of came out of necessity, but essentially I have a son. He's 16 months old now. So
Okay.
kind of finding that work-life balance of trying to be a decent dad, decent husband, but also, selfishly chasing my ambitions and giving it the respect it desires. I was kind of having to like figure out ways to kind of please all fronts. So, the way that my work schedule works, like a lot of times that evening time frame, that dusk era is when I really like to train and shoot. That's when it's most conducive for me to shoot at my house. But that's also, when my wife's been with the kid all day, she kind of wants a break too. He needs to take a bath, eat dinner, all that stuff. So I was having to spend the evening with them. And then as soon as they went to sleep, I was trying to catch like that last half hour, 20 minutes of daylight, which in reality was never enough, in the summer months. So I ended up taking a old Leo photo tripod and some light riggings and some Milwaukee batteries. And I would just shoot down, I didn't necessarily feel comfortable shooting at distance at night, you know, so I just rigged the cameras at my 100-yard range and I ran my dot drills at night. So luckily, I don't really have any neighbors close enough that it was a problem. But yeah, you gotta do what you gotta do, I suppose.
Yeah, no, I thought that was really cool. And you know, I think everyone likes to justify things a little bit of why they're at where they're at. But I I at least heard a couple like, well, if I was a it was my job to shoot, I could win too. But and then you stood up and said that, and I was like, thank you. Like it just
Yeah,
like I mean, and from my I guess my side of things, like I shoot all the time, and
yeah,
I damn sure didn't win it. You know what I mean?
yeah,
It's it's really cool to see um someone that I don't know, say it how it is and
I'm
put in the
I'm
work
sure
in
it
it.
rubs. I'm sure it rubbed a couple people the wrong way, but I felt like it needed to be said. And anyone that knows me well knows if it needs to be said, no one else will say it. You know, I'll gladly say it. And I knew there were some people thinking that, wow, if that was my job, then I could do it too. And generally, my first question I ask them is, I'm like, okay, how many national matches have you won? And the answer is normally zero. And I tell them I won a national match before I ever got this job. I got this job, based off performances that I was getting when I was active duty, still running a sniper platoon and working full time and deploying and going to the field. Like, I mean, it's kind of one of those things, I guess, when I hear people make those comments, in my mind, I'm like, you're saying that to make yourself feel better so you're less accountable of your performance, which, and I'll play devil's advocate here. I mean, I got it good. It is my
Right. I
job.
mean, it helps for
Yeah,
sure,
like
but
yeah, but we have that conversation a lot too. That it's a lot of responsibility. I think having this job because in a lot of
right.
ways you're expected to perform, right? Because I mean, with the there's a few people that do this for a living, but they do it for a living kind of in a offset manner, right? Like they're either in the industry, they own a company associated with the sport. Like they found
Right.
some way to make it their living. But there's really no one that like does it for a living like we do. And that being said, too, to kind of shed some light on that, like we don't just compete. That's not just our job.
Right.
So I do a lot of teaching, and that's actually, I would say it's a pretty even 50-50 split, maybe 60-40 with teaching and competing. So,
Okay.
but yeah, no, I felt like I needed to say it because I knew there were people thinking that, and that's fine. They can think that all they want, but the people that have won this prior to myself, like, I've heard the stories about them. Like there's like Tyler Payne is one of my teammates. Like Tyler Payne won the Golden Bullet in 2016. I've talked with him and he told me what it took to do that. There's like stories that have stuck out with me. And when I first started shooting too, I became pretty well acquainted too with Matt Brousseau. So I picked Matt's brain quite a bit, and Matt was actually one of the first people to congratulate me too when I won it. And I held him in very high regard, and I have a lot of respect for him because he was skull dragging people when that wasn't common. Like I think Brousseau, if I remember correctly, it was 18 matches in a row that he took first or second at. Like 2-day national matches, he went
I didn't
18 in a
realize that.
row. Oh yeah, I think in so many ways, that's debatable, I suppose, but in my mind, he's still probably the most dominant PRS shooter that we've ever had. But I talked to those guys and asked them what it took, and there's a story about Dave Preston that always stuck out to me a lot. Dave this was kind of when he was on his reign of terror too. He still is very competitive. He probably has one of the most impressive PRS records there is, but he had shot a match, didn't have like a desirable placing. So in between that match and the next match he shot that was like a week or two later, he burnt out an entire brand new barrel training. And so like stories like that have kind of stuck with me, that it's like, the people that really want it bad enough, they'll figure it out. And, I growing up wrestling and fighting, I had a coach and he always said, if it's important to you, you'll find a way. If not, you'll find an excuse. And that's kind of always stuck with me, that, if it's important, it doesn't matter how you get there. You need to figure out to get there, and you're going to figure out a way to do it. If not, you're going to create an easy out or an avenue to tell yourself to explain why you didn't perform the way you did, and just instead of just taking responsibility for it and trying to figure it out. So, yeah,
Yeah.
but, and I know that may come off maybe a little bit pompous to certain people, but, it's, I was talking to a friend recently and I told him, I was like, like I've put in too much work, too much blood, sweat, and tears to not feel like I rate an opinion, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So
Well, and that's the thing. I think a lot of people see champions or people that are highly successful in whatever field they are as arrogant or insert adjective, but you don't get to that point by not doing the work, and you have to be confident in yourself as well, or it's
yeah.
just
Oh,
not.
you have to. I think the first person that really opened my eyes to that, and I'm sure I'll get a lot of laughs at this one, but by far the most arrogant person that I know or have ever met is Ben Gossett. And like when I tell people that, especially people who have talked with him, they always laugh. They're like, no, like Ben's the nicest, most humble guy I've ever met. And I genuinely tell them, I was like, oh, you're probably not actually friends with him then. Because the few of us that are and talk with him, he is the most confident, arrogant person I've ever met. And, I remember him telling me, he's like, you have to be. And, he doesn't outwardly project it though to strangers, which is good, right? Because he's
Right.
perceived in, a very good manner because of that. But, deep down, you got to tell yourself that, if you don't think you're going to win it, who else is going to think that,
Right. Yeah, I don't know Ben very well. I squatted with him and Bushman at Clay's match this year, and they
I'm
were
sorry.
just,
Yeah, I'm
dude,
sorry.
it was relentless. I mean, they were king shit talkers to each other, and it was it
Oh,
was it
yeah.
was good. It was really good. Then I always thought Ben was, a quieter guy. Just I hadn't been around him very much, so it was really fun to
Yeah.
see them kind
Yeah.
of getting after it. But so okay, so the big thing I kind of want to pick your brain a little bit is like the
Sure.
mental side of things a little bit. So I saw in one of your podcasts that you did, I think it was with the shooter's mindset, you said you didn't really believe in the mental game.
Mhm.
What what makes you say that?
So I think that shooting is very simple, right? It's
Mm,
a very objective task. It's a manner of doing something repetitively and doing it well and judging the environmentals within a certain margin, and it's X's and O's. You either did or didn't do the task. I think that when people start implementing outside influences of life or outside distractions into shooting, that's when they stop keeping shooting at the forefront of their mind. So when I say I don't have a mental game, I think that's because when I'm shooting, I just focus on shooting. It's simple. Like I don't think because I had a bad day yesterday, I'm going to pull this trigger any different. Or I don't think because, my wife and I are fighting that I'm all of a sudden now going to read the wind differently than I would have otherwise. Like I think
makes sense.
shooting is very objective. And when a lot of people like get into the mental game of portion or the mental game portion of shooting, it's always kind of like, it's always kind of confused me, I guess, a little bit because they're like, oh, my head's just not in it, and it's like, okay, well, like, did you make a mental mistake? Did you shoot targets out of order? Did you do this? And the answer is generally, well, no, I'm just not shooting good. And it's like, well, then you need to just be present. Like when you're doing that task, you need to be thinking about nothing else, like focusing on the environmentals, reading the plate, pulling the trigger. And I've been told that maybe that is my mental game, you know. But I try and keep it that simple. I don't think there's a whole lot to it. I think that when people start complicating it a little bit, and like to add like context to this too, I've read a lot of the mental management books. I've looked at Lanny Basham's, mental management system. I've read, Parenting Champions with Winning in Mind, like, The Talent Code. I've read a lot of those books and I understand it. Just for me, the shoe didn't fit, I suppose. So it's something that I don't
Okay.
currently have a problem with. And I feel like if I keep looking hard enough, I'll find a problem I don't have. So
No, and
I'm always kind of
I mean
avoiding it.
it obviously works. So I don't I'm the exact opposite. So and
Okay.
this is kind of why I wanted to ask. So like I did a lot of practice and a lot of work this year. Uh, where I feel like I have all of the necessary skills that I need to compete at a high level. And
Right.
I was able to put that together at one match this year, and it was a very good feeling. But I was incredibly focused throughout the entire
Okay.
match, and I have not been able to replicate that since then. I had a better season this year than I did before, but um, it's almost like if I can't figure out a way to be hyper focused on it on what's going on as soon as the timer starts, like it just kind of almost goes through the motions and
Okay.
set the gun down, pull the trigger, did it hit or not? Okay, move on. And then the stage is over and it's like, well shit, what just happened? And so trying to kind of well, honestly, talk to a bunch of different people and see how uh they go about approaching things. You know what I mean?
So, if I ask you a question then on that, do you have like a timeline or routine when you're with your squad and you're getting on that stage? Like when you're X amount of shooters out, do you do certain levels of preparation? And then when you're two shooters out, you do this level of preparation. And then one shooter out, you do this level of preparation. Do you have any kind of system like that?
Not necessarily in the sense of like how far out I am shooting, but I have like a checklist of things I need to get done before it's my time to go.
So the reason I ask is because you're talking about being hyper focused like that. And what I found is that for me to enjoy myself, enjoy the match, enjoy the sport and not get burnt out, I can't be in that hyper focused
Mhm.
the entire time. Like I can't
Right.
do it.
Yeah.
Like you can't do that for like a 10, 12 hour period, whatever it is. So like I've I have a system of when I'm X amount of shooters out or in the shoot, what I do. And that's really helped me to kind of turn it on, turn it off, turn it on, turn it off. Because like we used to, when I was so operational, we used to have a saying, max, max, relax. That I
Max,
think
max,
people get,
relax.
yeah, max, max, relax. Meaning when you work hard, you bust your ass. But when you're relaxing, you relax. Kind of like the old, there's no halfway crump type deal,
Yeah.
like if you float in the gray area, in my opinion, that's where you get exhausted. So like the gray area being like, hey, are you watching this shooter shoot right now? Like, are you paying attention or are you like, shooting the shit? It's
Right.
like, well, most people, I would say their answer would be a little bit of both. And they do a little bit of both almost all the time. And for me personally, that just doesn't work. So if you ever like see me and I'm like joking around, I'm normally completely off glass and I am like fully committed to screwing around and, joking with friends. But for me, like what I normally do is when I'm so I'll find three ahead of me. So I'll normally always get to a squad and I'll ask, okay, who's ahead of me? Okay, who's ahead of him? Who's ahead of him? So I know. So I normally know that four shooters out, when I see the fourth shooter ahead of me and he's going, that's like my like, okay, like shut off the screw around time. And that's when I kind of go in and I make sure like, okay, actually let me back plan here. As soon as I'm done shooting a stage, right? The first thing I do is I take my spent rounds, I put them in and I load my mags immediately.
Yep.
Then I normally, for me personally, and I know I've told some friends this. I know a buddy of mine, Ryan Adams, who shoots out of Texas. He had a couple podiums this year, and he shot his ass off. And something I told him, and he said it worked well for him. So that's the reason I'm sharing it. Is I've chosen to, when I write match notes to myself, I don't write anything negative. So when I'm writing notes in there, I tell people like training and practice is where you learn and you're hard on yourself. At a match, you're not going to learn anything. A match is a time to perform, not a time to learn, in my opinion. So when I'm at a match, the only thing that goes in my match book note wise is positive. Like I will literally write like great plate reading, good call, like first round impact on the wind, spot on. Like I will write everything I did positive because in my opinion, there's nothing negative that I'm going to write in there that's going to be conducive to me placing higher. So I
Yeah.
only write positives in that match books. So again, download, reload mags, write that down in my match book. Then the next thing I do is I pull up the next stage and I have my dope. I'll
Mm.
have like a general direction of fire and dope. I leave all my win one and win two on zero, and that's it. And I'll have those down. And then, I go to kind of my fuck off time, and I'll talk with people or whatever. And I'll normally have 3 or 4 or 5 shooters of doing that. Then backtrack what I was saying before. When I hit that fourth shooter out, it's kind of like, all right, like turn off the slack jaw stuff. Then kind of get back, recheck everything I did before. Okay, how many rounds is the stage? How many rounds are in my mags? Like, do I have my dope part? Okay. And then I'll like go in, write my kind of win brackets. And I do more win brackets maybe than most people. But I do that so that, as I'm going through this process, right? We talked about that's kind of the fourth shooter out, right?
Mm-hmm.
Third shooter out for me is I wear a double ear pro when I shoot. So when I'm in that screw off time, I normally will take off my in ears and just put my Peltors over it so I can talk to people and have conversational tone. 3 shooters out, my in ears go back in, Peltors go back over it because it gives you a couple shooters to kind of acclimate to that different level of volume. Whereas I've done it before, right before you shoot, and then you can't hear shit and you feel very out of tune.
Yeah.
So I'll do that 3 shooters out and then 2 shooters out, right? I'll go back through and that's when I'm checking the environmentals as much as I can and really trying to narrow my win brackets, figure out exactly where I am and stuff. And that's normally too when I'll walk to my gun. I'll walk to my gun. I'll put my dope on the gun, put whatever predetermined win that I have, make sure my dope card, whether I'm doing hand mounted dope or a dope board on my gun, whatever kind of, or, say I need a tack table, I need a game replay, whatever. I make sure that gun's squared away, 2 shooters out. Then I go back, and when I am 1 shooter out, and if you ever shoot with me, you can see this, my gun is in my hand. Like, so I think it's a match etiquette thing too, and PRS is the worst in the world at it. at like, people like decide to get their shit ready right when it's like time to shoot. So I have my gun in my hand normally, and I'll throw like my sandbag on my shoulder or something like that. And I'm doing nothing other than staring at the plate. Like I'm staring at the plate, I'm staring at the wind. That way, as soon as that next shooter's done, I walk up and I'm ready to go. And for me, having like that structure is a stress alleviator because I'm never like wondering, oh, did I do this right? Man, did I have this squared away? Like if I do that process every time, there's nothing that I can mess up. And I really don't have a lot of mental errors, not in the way that some people do. But when I talk to some people, they have a very kind of scattered way of getting things done. Like even like their pre-flight checklist, shooter, do you understand the course of fire? And I'll hear people say, I do. And they're like still looking at their gun or kind of checking things out. It's like, man, you need to have like a process for that. Because I feel like that's when the confusion sets in. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I didn't mean to kind of grill you on that
No,
one,
no,
but like,
I love that.
yeah, it kind of like to me that just it works better with my personality where I can tune in, tune out, tune in, tune out, and like I keep myself on that schedule, and it normally works pretty good. Because when I do that, like when I'm focused, like you said, you're hyper focused, like all your attention's on that, and even like people will try and talk to me or something like that, and I'll be like, hey man, give me like I'll catch back up with you when I'm done shooting or whatever, like,
Yeah.
but and most people respect that. I don't ever have a problem with it,
Right.
so it works. You tune in, you do your thing, and then when you're done, because sometimes Tuesdays don't go your way,
Right.
and I think it's important too to have a system for that and stuff. But I don't have everything figured out. That's for damn sure. But like I've at least figured out that for me that works keeping myself to that structure.
No, I like that. I may have to sit and kind of mess and see what works, but
Yeah.
that's been a lot of my problems is being able to get in and out of that state. And it's
Yeah.
I don't know. I think my mind is wandering all the time at ADD, whatever, and it's hard for me to flip that and do. I guess do I need to do all the time, but
Yeah, it's tough. A lot of people actually too, like psychologists get into it actually, with like fighters and stuff like that. I learned it like there's certain actions or an action associated with a phrase can actually do like a mental shift. So like fighters and stuff sometimes, right? Like a lot of fighters will use like they'll use nose crank, right? Like smelling salts or
yeah,
something like that, like an hour out from the fight. But once they do that, it's like a click, like we're in fight mode now. Then you start rolling, then you start sweating, you get your hand pads out, and then but it's like like playtime's over, we're ready to shoot now. Like
yeah,
for me, like when I put my belt on, like my shooting belt, like I tell myself, like, I'm training now. Like if I'm just like gathering dope or zeroing, I won't put my shooting belt on. And then when I put my shooting belt on, for me, it's kind of like a mental shift. Like, okay, like I'm back in this now. You know what I mean? So, again, I don't have that part figured out. I have it like at least just having the system has helped me this far,
yeah,
having kind of sequential steps like that. But I see that a lot with people where like they'll be like ready to shoot and they're like joking about something or doing this or doing that, or they're like, oh, how many rounds is it? And like I totally understand a lot of people, we're there at those matches for different reasons. We're not
right,
all there to win the match. I'm sure everyone would like to, but truthfully, not everyone's there to win that match. So,
right,
guys that are there to have a good time, I appreciate them because they keep the sport, to keep the sport reality.
right,
But, it's just, I tell people too sometimes, like I had a close friend and we were talking about this recently, and he was talking about his match placements, squads with the same dudes every single time. He has like the same 5 or 6 guys that they're always jumping squads to do. And this year I told myself, I'm not jumping squads. I'm not playing that game. Like my general rule of thumb is I like to have one person that I really trust in that squad just to have your back,
yeah,
like, and it's really good if you're on opposite ends of the shooting order. If you're like first, he's like fifth in a 10-man squad or something like that. That way you're kind of not screwing with his process. He's not screwing with yours. He can be on glass to back you up. But other than that, you really don't need a whole
yeah,
bunch of people in there because I found that like when you're with like your 6 or 10 buddies or whatever it is, a lot more screwing off happens.
yep.
So Yeah. So I told him, I was like, yeah, I was like, it's kind of the birds of a feather thing, man. Like you need to start squatting with people that are accomplishing the things that you're working towards. Like you got to kind of ditch the friend group that doesn't have the same goals as you. Now, again, I'm not saying drop, sell out, but if you have different intentions than the people you're shooting with, that'll show, like I'm sure
Right.
you've had it before too, where you shoot with a stellar squad of like shooters, like it's just a little bit of a different atmosphere and
It
attitude in the
is.
squad,
Yeah,
so
for sure.
yeah,
Okay. Well, so that makes sense on like your process and everything. One thing that I met you at the King Cole Canyon match this year in
yeah,
Raton. One of the
train
things
wreck.
that impressed me was I think it was day one, but you zeroed a stage,
Sure did.
and the way you handled that and ultimately finished the match, I thought was really impressive. Uh,
Appreciate it.
how I mean, obviously at your level, it's probably been very few and far between that you've zeroed a stage. I mean,
Yep.
I haven't zeroed a stage in a long time, and I'm not as proficient as you. How do you get that out of your head to not let it affect the next stage?
Man, it's tough. But so to answer your question, if you zero stage or have something catastrophic like that, like it's key to diagnose why and what happened.
Hmm.
Which in that situation, I did figure out why. Took me a couple matches to figure it out, but I really felt like I had some winning performances early in the year, and I never got a win. I had a lot of podiums, and I would have one train wreck over and over. And I diagnosed the issue and changed that equipment, and everything was fine after that. But you kind of have to have a mental shift. And I found in the past that when I first started shooting, the train wreck was never what cost me the match. Now, if you zero a stage, yeah, that's going to cost you the match. That's a pretty big train wreck. But generally, if I had a train wreck, and I'm saying a train wreck as in like dropping 3 or 4 or 5 or whatever,
Right.
it was never that lost me the match. It was the fact that I let that train wreck drag into the next stage, or maybe 2 or 3 stages later. And I mean, you see it all the time. You
Yeah.
watch somebody. Normally, when it happens is when they make a mental mistake. Like they shot fine, but they shot something out of order or did something. And then the next stage, they drag it on. The next stage, they drag it on. And then in reality, 3 or 4 stages later, they're still talking about it.
Right.
So that's a big one is I don't let myself talk about it. It's hard sometimes because we love to bitch and moan, or at least I do. But like I when that happens, and I got this from Chris Kutalik actually. And Chris is a stud. He was a real good shooter in Texas when I first was kind of learning how to shoot PRS. And he said what he would do sometimes is he would literally set a timer. So if he had a stage timer, right, that's for a 2-minute stage. Well, when he gets done with the stage or whatever, kind of regroups himself, he'd start his timer. And he gives himself 2 minutes. 2 minutes, get out of your system. And I've seen Chris do it. He walk kind of behind the porta shitters or wherever where no one can see him. He's throwing his bag on the ground, cussing and MF for
Yeah.
this and stuff. But you get it out of your system and you move along. You know what I mean? It's almost kind of like two dudes that dislike each other. You're like, man, just fight already and
Fight
get
it
it out of
out.
your system. Fight it out. And then 10 minutes later they're buying each other beers and they're best friends. So I think it's important to emotionally like get it out and then move on. Um, but expectation management is also huge too, right? So I had a goal prior to that stage happening, and after that stage happened, I needed to shift my goals. And actually, Austin Bushman at that match even said something. He said something to that same effect. He's like, "Okay," he's like, "You're too smart to understand that didn't just cost you the match. It did. So what are you going to do about it now? What's your goal?" And I knew that like with the level of competition at that match and everything, that if I could still stay in the top 10, like a top 10 finish, zeroing a 10-point stage, like I would still call that I'll call it a successful match, right? But it's still a
Right.
successful performance, I would call it. And I was able to do that.
And you did it. Yeah.
So like I couldn't have been too upset about it. You know, you can always what if. Well, if I didn't get that stage, you know, I actually would have won or this or that, but it doesn't matter. You know what I mean? But it's yeah, it's tough. It really, really is. Because if you start rationalizing, you know, you're gonna be like, well, I flew here, spent all this money, I did this. You know, it starts to sting a lot more. So it's
Yeah.
good to just kind of like data dump it. But for me, diagnosing the why and deciding is it in my control or outside my control is the most important thing to me, because regardless of which answer it is, it's okay. If it's outside my control, it's okay. There's nothing I could do about it anyways. It's not my fault. If it's inside my control, great. That means I can fix it. I can do better. So to me, regardless of which one of those it is, it's okay, because I either can fix the problem and get better and do better, or it's outside my control and I couldn't have stopped it anyways. You know,
Yeah.
and it's like it happens, right? Like, you know, the AG Cup this year, that happened to me. Day 3 of the AG Cup, you know, I was suspect that my barrel was getting tired, but it still shot little holes and was doing everything it should have. And just stuff happens, right? You know, like day 3, first one of this, you know, first stage of the entire match, I got a 3 out of 12. I dropped 9 and I couldn't touch targets that, you know, it was pretty demoralizing. That it was like Caruso, Clay, and Gossett went in front of me. And I think between the 3 of them collectively, maybe they dropped 2 points. And I went up there and just face planted on it. And I was like, okay, this is a serious problem, you know, and it's like, okay, we'll figure out the why. And so I was like, well, you know, my gun's perfect. Was that me? Did I choke? Did I do whatever? And the way things were set up, you know, with kind of Tom's guidelines, like, you know, I shot the next stage with the same gun and was like, okay, there's a problem. Like, because the next stage I burned 2 in the berm on purpose, trying to figure out where I was at, trying to drag it back to steel. It was that bad. And so I took it to the 100-yard board real quick with what little time we had and dropped 60 feet per second on me. So barrel's done. That happens, you know. But as soon as that I realized that, I was like, it's okay. You know, that's not my fault. You know, well,
Right.
it is my fault. I could have changed that barrel prematurely, but I didn't think that, you know, 2,000 rounds for a GT was excessive. I thought that was still in the realm of
Is that what you were
acceptability.
at? 2000
Just
rounds?
over, it was like 2110, I think is what it was when it just shit the bed.
Wow.
Yeah. You know, and
I mean, it happens, but yeah, I wouldn't have. I pulled my last GT barrel with 2,900.
you know, and man, I had a dasher a while ago that I shot to 3,600 rounds with. I won a club match with it at like 3,400 rounds. Like, you know, like,
Yeah.
so I knew it was a gamble, but I didn't think that it was I didn't think it was unreasonable. But, you know, I learned my lesson. I just, you know, I made a joke there. I was like, you know, it's cool. I like learning these lessons, but for once, I would like to learn a lesson when it's not such high stakes.
Yeah.
Every time I learn a lesson, it's like, you know, like I broke a trigger at my first finale and I thought I was going to do some pretty good things at that match. And it's like, okay, cool. I got it. Bix and anti comp triggers in the dust aren't conducive and you can't put lighter fluid in a Bix. Got it. But I wish I would have learned that at a club match, you know?
Right.
But you know, but like I was
Dang.
saying, you know, as soon as I diagnosed the issue and was like, okay, I know why now. It's like, well, you know, shift focus. So, you know, it's a 1 day match. Anyone can win a 1 day match. You know, like that's, you know, a 2 or 3 day match. The best shooter wins. A 1 day match. It's anybody's game. Anybody can catch on fire for a couple stages and run away with it.
Yeah.
So I told myself, you know, the match with the caliber of shooters is there. The match is over for me, but let's get some stage wins. You know, so that's what I gunned for. I gunned for some stage wins, you know. But you know, and you know, I made some money back that way. So it's
There
okay,
you go.
you know. So
This
but
was
I
your
think that's
first
the
AG
biggest thing.
match, right?
Yeah, I had never done it before.
How'd you like it compared to, the
Man,
finale or a regular match?
Man, if the PRS as a whole could switch to that style of match, I would absolutely love it. And I'm sure the sport would be completely dead in about 2 years.
But yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like yeah, like it's not. I thought the course of fire that Tom did, with a whole lot of compliments to Greg Bell on that. because Greg Bell was his assistant MD for that. And Greg
Mm.
proofed the whole course of fire and was like, Tom, we need to make targets smaller. We need to make them smaller. We need to make them smaller, and I'm thankful for that because I mean, it was a skull drag match.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, oh, yeah, it was, God, it hurt your feelings. Like there was one of the guys there that was, buddy of mine was shooting lights out like 6 stages in on day 3. And, I had already fallen on my face. So about 5 or 6 stages in, I was really happy that I had a whole lot of miserable friends as well. Cause by then most of them had face planted a stage or two. After the first stage, I was really the only one that was like not happy, and then 5 or 6 stages later, I had a whole big group of people to soak in misery with. But he was shooting real well. And I was like, how you feeling, bud? And he's like, I think I got it. I think I'm going to do this again. It's like, hell yeah, go for it. And then he shoots right before me and he's 0 to stage, 0 to 12 round stage. And it was no gun problem, no nothing, just shitty wind with skyline targets in the bushes. And just like, I talked to him like 2 stages later. He's like, I don't know if I've ever been in such an emotional high and low in my life. He's like, I went from thinking I was going to win it to like hoping I'm not in last place, But that match style though was awesome because man, if you got like there's a couple stages that were like I think there was 4 stages or 5 stages on day 3 that no one cleaned. No one.
Wow.
Yeah. So it was one of those that if you dropped 4 or 5, it was like, okay, it's not terrible. Like you were just working for points. And I
Right.
really, really liked that style of match. But it's just this, that would just never work. Like
Right.
I really liked, everyone shooting your own game too. Like not being able to talk about win, to talk about
Mhm.
stage strategy, talk about anything. It's very like freeing and uncomplicated. Because you're not like, do I do this? Do I tripod this? Do I do that? It's just like, well, I can't bounce ideas off all the good idea fairies around here. So all I got to do is just pick a plan and stick with it. So I liked it a lot. Actually, it was a really cool format. But again, I just it would never work in our sport too. So
No, I don't think it's like a general match, but I really want to shoot the AG Cup. I
yeah, I
was
would I would I would highly recommend it, man. If it's something you want to do, I know the cost of entry is pretty pricey, but just for the
so
experience, I thought it was cool.
I went back and forth on it a lot, and so what I decided was if I can consistently podium for 2024, then I'll do it 2025, and that'll
Yeah, and
be
I
kind of my
know.
rule to go do it.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think that's absolutely fair. Yeah, it's I mean, I hope the AG Cup stays a thing. I know it was really on the fence this year of if it was even going to be next year or not, but I don't know if they had talked about it yet or not. But Tom announced it at the AG Cup that it will be a thing again this year,
Good.
and it will be a thing in the sense that they will be integrated into season scores with the PRS. I don't think the AG Cup is ever going to go away, but it was going to go back to just being invitation only.
Right.
So they said they're going to do it again as far as like integration into the normal season, which I think is great. I really enjoy the format. I like that, you have people that are kind of gambling on themselves, so to speak. Like
Yeah.
I think it's cool. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's super cool. And then the AG matches throughout the season are some of my favorite matches
Oh yeah.
throughout the season. They're just the amount of people that show up and the course of fire that ends up getting set up is always just fun.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, they attract a crowd. I think more so I enjoy the fact that the shooters they attract,
Hmm.
which like and this isn't like diminishing anybody's accomplishment, but like winning an AG Cup qualifier is not the same as winning a normal non-qualifier match in the middle of nowhere. You know what
I
I mean?
agree.
Like it's not the same. Like, we were talking about with some people, it's like even towards the end of the year when people are trying to grab points, like the last AG match we shot, there was like 16 out of the top 20 shooters in the country were at one match.
Yeah.
It's like, dude, that's like, that's
Yeah.
tough.
Well, I mean, yeah, and like how many? how many of the top shooters were like at Punisher and the Collis match? And I mean, there's 25 guys that if they won, no one will be surprised.
Yeah, it's tough, man. It really, really is. Getting wins is tough. Like I got this year, like I was a match short this year getting a 300, and that was really my goal. So this year, like that's gonna be hot after that, like getting a 300 going into the finale. And it's
Oh
like,
yeah,
man, you gotta shoot your ass off, but you do need a little bit of luck here or there sometimes,
yeah,
like because you show up and it's like, man, you could have shot as good as you could have, but maybe things just didn't work out in your favor a little bit. Or,
yeah,
like you have a match where you think like, man, I got this. I think I did it. And then, you figure out somebody else dropped like 1 point on the day. You're like, fuck. Like,
yeah,
oh,
yeah, yeah. Okay, so one of the things I heard that heard you say was people people making excuses or bitching about like that they're equipped, oh my gun's not shooting good or blah blah blah, and that it's your job to have your equipment lined out before you come to a match. And
100%.
I loved it when I loved hearing you say that because I'm sure as you have to, you hear every excuse in the book whenever people shoot. But
Yeah.
so do you have a process or like how do you go about making sure all your shit's lined out before you come to a match?
Okay. So the biggest thing for me is my zero. And when I first moved down here to the Southeast, I had a really good shooter tell me, he said, down here in the Southeast, you need a perfect gun. And I never really like understood what that meant. And the more I shot here, the more I understood it, that it's different than out west, right? Out west, really the environmentals are your biggest that's the thing you're contending with most, trying to get a win, right?
Yeah,
Whereas down here in the southeast, like you can't drop points.
right.
You have people winning matches dropping, single digits, right? Low single digits. Like you can't miss. And knowing where my zero is super, super important to me. So I'm pretty fortunate that I have, the property that I have here, because I can shoot to a little over 600 yards at my house. But my zero range that I have, I you're talking about Ratona. After that, I had scope issues, right? And so I dove heavily into the scope realm and glass and looking up old doctrine on some of the F class and bench rest shooting manuals on lights effect on scopes and how you have like you'll hear people talk about wandering zeros and stuff. Well, it's mostly all
Yeah.
lighting. And I think one of the best quotes I heard on that was, your dope and data is a science, wind is an art, and light is voodoo. And I think that's pretty true. I think it's very hard to quantify it, but without getting into the weeds, like I've shot a lot of rounds just looking for lighting effects on stuff, but essentially, like the old adage of, sun up, sights up, sun down, sights down is pretty true. So I really like to check my zero 3 times. Well, I shouldn't say that. I like to check it a lot, but I will do 3 different conditions. So I do gray light first thing in the morning. I will do high noon when the sun is at its worst, and I will do it again. And the way that my range faces, I will do it kind of like about 4:30 or 5 o'clock when the sun's about 3 fingers or a hand's worth over the pine trees behind me, because it's getting all that light into the back of my ocular lens. And I feel like basically the gray light combined with that, I get a really good idea of where my zero's at. And I like to see it multiple days in a row. So my zero, to answer your question, my first part of that is my zero, making sure my zero is perfect. And what I found is when I have a really good gun that shoots well, it's in the same place all the time, you know. So I make sure I have a really good zero, and then The next one, I shoot Burger 105 hybrids. So truthfully, like true in BC and a lot of that stuff isn't a factor. Like, I mean, I
Yeah.
shot, if I'm shooting Bartline barrels, like their CDM from AB is perfect.
Dead nuts.
I've only ever had one barrel. I shot a Hawk Hill towards the end of the year, and I think it was just maybe a little bit tighter bore. And I actually did have to play with my BC, but that was the only time I've had to do that.
Mm.
So you know, again, like the dope is normally never an issue, but after I know my zero is perfect, I shoot a lot of 500-yard paper groups. And I've talked with a couple of people actually that have asked me to start posting them, so I'm going to. So I have a library. I have like a Rolodex in my room of 500-yard groups on paper. And I think it's a sweet spot where I get all the information I need on how a gun is shooting. Because you're not going to like shoot 500, then all of a sudden it falls apart at 1,000, unless you
Right.
have a stability issue or some type of like twist issue, right?
Yeah.
But I do a lot of 500-yard groups on paper, and that's told me a lot of truths about guns. And I'll probably you'll probably get a lot of people that will argue with me about this one till they're blue in the face, but I don't believe in quarter-minute guns. I don't think there's such a thing.
And what?
A quarter-minute gun.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah, they don't exist. I've heard people say they do, and I
But
don't
don't
think
you
they
know
exist.
everyone on Facebook shoots one hole groups out of every gun they own?
And I tell them too. I've shot a whole lot of one-hole groups with a gun that doesn't shoot one hole. Like it's just it happens. But I generally will do one of two things. I either do three 5-shot groups at 500 or two 10-shot groups at 500. And to me, that is about as it tells me almost everything you need to know.
Yeah.
And I've kind of cut it back a little bit, but the way I look at it is we shoot 10 round stages. So I shoot 2 stages worth of information, and
Yeah.
it kind of tells me what the gun will do. And I don't really want to know how good a gun will do. I want to see it. Well, I shouldn't say that. I want to see how good it'll do, but I don't want to see it at its best. I want to see it at its worst. And I think a lot of people that shoot 3-round groups or 5-round groups at 100, that's you're looking for confidence. You just want to see one little hole and call it good. Where it's like, well, do you want to see that, or do you want to see actually how the gun shoots?
Right.
So, which like a lot of our service rifle and international rifle shooters that shoot high power and stuff. I mean, they do 20-round strings. When they shoot groups to test a gun's accuracy, they shoot 20 rounds straight. And they're shooting barrel burning 6 mils just like we are. Or like, the IR shooters, some of your international rifle guys and stuff with rimfire, they shoot 40-shot groups. Like they want to see what a gun actually does. So I've adopted some of that. And I think that will kind of give me the confidence over and over and over again. And that's why I say I don't think a quarter-minute gun exists. Like I have a couple barrels, or I've had two really that were just, I mean, they were absolute hummers. I mean, they
Yeah.
shot as good as a barrel will shoot, and it got really, really close to a third of a minute all the time. But I never shot a quarter. But
So what?
so
So your group's at 500. So what do you like? If for something to pass, like what you expect it to do and feel confident take to a match, what are you looking at out of that group?
2 inches,
2 inches.
2 inches. Yeah. If
Okay.
I'm shooting like 3 5-shot groups, I want to see like on the absolute highest end 2.5, but in reality I want those to be like 2.1, 2.2, or sub 2. It's right in that realm. And I found that that's about the most you can ask for. I shot a lot of 1.5-inch groups at 500. Like I have a 10-shot group in there that it was two 10-shot groups. One was 1.6 and the other was 1.71, I think. And I mean the shoot's pretty damn good, but
Yeah,
it's
that's
not a quarter minute. But yeah, that's what I look for. And I normally find that if that buffs, everything else is fine.
that's no,
Yeah,
that's really interesting. I don't. So I do similar testing. I live in the windiest the windiest city in the country, and so I don't shoot groups at distance a whole lot. I'll watch for vertical all the time, but I
Where are you out of? Actually, I'm
Amarillo,
not.
Amarillo, Texas.
Oh wow, yeah, you are. Yeah,
It's windy
yeah,
all the time.
yeah.
Uh,
Oh wow, yeah, absolutely.
and so I can't tell you how many times I'll be like shooting a target, and I'll be like, I'm gonna shoot a group, and then
And you watch your group just kind of do this deal, and you're like,
yes, yeah, I did a load development for a guy, and it was is I had to go out this day to go shoot, and it we had like a 20 to 30 mile an hour tailwind, and it was just switching constantly, and I was like, oh my god. So I found the biggest target at 800 yards, and I was like, I'm holding what I think it is in the center, and I'm not changing it, and just gonna watch what it does.
yeah.
And I went out, and the group was 12, 15 inches wide. And but I sent it to him. I was like, "Hey, it's shooting pretty good." And he's like, "It looks like shit." And I was like, "No, just look at the vertical."
Yeah.
But anyways, that's a whole different thing. But no,
Oh yeah.
it's
Yeah. I don't have the problems you have there. Like I joke at my house that you can probably tell the difference between a 7 twist and 8 twist gun at my house. Like there's no, I mean, I live in Georgia and the stretch that I'm shooting down is over it's over my hayfield. It's a 26-acre like hayfield. So like from my house, like over the top of that hayfield, it's following a pine row. Like I'm shooting maybe 30 or 40 yards off the pine row. So I mean, it's even if you feel wind and see mirage, like if you hold something, you're probably gonna miss. So like there's no wind, no nothing. It's actually a really good test bed for testing stuff like that, you know.
yeah, no, for sure.
Yeah.
I just I always I think it's really interesting to see how different people from different regions shoot and look at things. You know.
Yeah, and it's I think, you know, to kind of I guess fully answer your question, right? Because you had asked me like what what gives me the confidence that a gun's ready for a match, right? So
Mhm.
I like wrote down some things. So like my zero for sure. Testing the capability of the guns at 500 yards for sure. But I think one thing that changed the way I thought quite a bit was a kind of buddy of mine or mentor in the shooting world. He had told me that he never needs to true a gun. He says every time he's like, I'll get a new barrel and I'll make sure the BC is where it needs to be. He's like, and that's it. He's like, I don't need to shoot 10 different distances and true it. He's like, I make sure my zero is perfect and I put everything in the Kestrel perfect and it's always fine. Now again, like the caveat, we all shoot 105 hybrids. So like, you know, there's that. But
Yeah.
that was kind of crazy to me because I felt like I always saw little weird nuances that I like, you know, oh, I'm a half tenth high here, I'm a tenth low there. There's stuff like that. And I really, really focused on, you know, everyone says garbage in, garbage out. Like, you know, it's kind of a cliche, but really, you know, focusing on putting perfect inputs in my
Yeah.
Kestrel. And when I started to do that, I'll be honest, a lot of my problems went away. They really, really did. And so I do, if I'm testing a zero, right, for a gun, because I know a lot of people want like quantifiable things, like you said, you know, how big is the group? Like they want numbers.
Yeah.
Because I'm the same way. I think that helps me with stuff. I what I like to do is I do 5 2-shot groups for my zero. So I
Okay.
will get into a position, I shoot two, break, rebuild completely, shoot two. What I'll normally do is I'll do traditional prone, modified prone, low kneeling, high kneeling, standing. So those are my 5 positions. And I will do that when I check my zero. And, you know, I don't put myself under a time stress or anything. Like I make sure it's perfect. But what I found is that gives me a very, very good reality of where my zero is. You know, in certain positions, right? If I'm shooting a high kneeling or like a low standing, I'm gonna probably round down a half tenth or so on my dope. because I know in those positions my natural tendency is to shoot higher. And I've shot a lot of paper to be able to tell that. But what I utilize most, and the reason I do that, is I use my zero offset in my Kestrel a lot. And I see people all the time say, like, oh, my zero is perfect. I was like, you mean to tell me that if I were to take an overlay of all your zeros, that it is 0.00 on zero height and 0.00 on zero offset? I was like, I'm not saying you're full of it, but most scopes can't actually resolve like that, right?
Right.
The only one that I know of is the Gen 3 Razor with the
Right.
Infinite
The
Zero.
vortex. Yeah.
Everything else, you're probably going to be a little, jacked up. So I utilize that a lot, and I found that when I did that and I was as precise as I could, that really helped me quite a bit. And if I perfect at 100 and I am perfect at 500 on, like, the 1-inch pasties that I put out there, and I'm kind of cutting the edges of it, or I'm right there, I really haven't had issues anywhere else. So I think that is something that helped me quite a bit. And then the last thing I wrote down when you asked me that question, barrel maintenance. I clean my gun. Like, if I shoot it, I clean it. And I know everybody's different and stuff, but I will give credit to that one, to Matt Brousseau. And when I talked with him, he won the Golden Bullet like almost 3 times, right? He won it 2 times and almost a third. And he cleaned his gun every time he shot it. He would shoot
Okay.
a day.
I don't want to go down a huge rabbit hole because I know cleaning is this. Everyone's got their own opinion. When you clean it, do you clean it back to bare metal, or what kind of clean are you looking
So I normally judge by the barrel and how easy it is to clean. So, like, if I'm having to push a whole bunch of, like, so I used, for the longest time, I just used Hops 9 foam, because Hops 9 foam is really good. That was something I used when I was operational too, because I could just spray it down the barrel and leave it overnight, and it's a non-corrosive, so it's not going to destroy stuff. So I liked that part of it, and then you just run a patch through it and go on patrol and you're fine. But I recently have, like, the last 6 months or so, I switched to Shooter's Choice, which is ammonia
at?
based.
Patch out.
But yeah, and it just cleans better. It cleans quicker, right? I'm sure it shortens your barrel life a little bit, but it cleans quicker. So if I'm using that, I rarely put a brush on it. But if I'm looking down the bore and I see things that I don't like, I will do that. But I kind of reverted, right? When I started shooting, I never used a bore scope. Then I got a bore scope, and that was probably the worst thing I ever did. So I don't use a bore scope really anymore. Or if I do a bore scope, I stop as soon as I hit the lands. Like, I
Okay.
don't let myself look into the lands, because you're going to see something you don't like. If it's a 6 mil and it has 400 or 500 rounds or more on it, like, it's not going to look super pretty. So I kind of let the paper and the chrono do the talking. Like, if the paper or the chrono tells me that I should look for something, then I will. But other than that, I don't. I normally just use the bore scope to make sure that my throat and free bore is clean and I don't have any signs of carbon ring or anything like that. And that's normally where I stop. So I
Okay.
don't.
And so how, I guess, so where do you know when to stop?
When I start pushing patches through and they're clean.
Okay. Easy enough.
Yeah, when I start pushing patches through and they're clean, if you let Shooter's Choice soak long enough, you almost always still get signs of copper and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But I found that if you clean a bare metal every time, that costs you money, right? Like, it costs
It
you
does.
money because it's going to take you 10, 20, 30 rounds to recondition that bore appropriately.
Yeah.
Whereas all my really good barrels that I found, where I'm very consistent and I do the bare minimum cleaning to bring it back to where it needs to be, 1 to 3 shots and I'm back to where I need to be.
Yeah.
So I try not to, like, if I clean too much and I'm really brushing the hell out of it, I'll know, because it'll take me 5 or 10 shots to get back to where it's supposed to. And
Yeah.
that's when I know, like, okay, I did too much. So I found that I do just enough that when I start getting a clean patch or two, I'll spray some WD-40 or something like that, like a light oil to condition it, kind of make sure that bore is getting some of the hydration it needs again. I'll push 2 dry patches through and I'm done.
Okay.
And when I have that, normally, you have like one clean cold bore and it's right back to where it should be.
Okay. I like that. Yeah, I spent a lot of time and effort trying different cleaning things over the last year. And one of our Airbnbs, we had a bunch of guys after day one, and half of them didn't touch it. A couple of us were running some patches through, and Corey Bogus was in our house. He's like, "You assholes, clean your barrels." And his gun
I
shot
love
good. I don't
Corey.
know how,
Yeah.
but it shot good. It
Yeah.
drove me crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. Corey's a great guy. And,
I love Corey.
yeah, Corey and I did some traveling and stuff together when I was in Texas and went to some matches and training together. So like, I love Corey. Corey's fantastic. But I mean, I would heavily disagree on Corey with that one.
I do
But
too.
but that being said, like I think things that people aren't taking into account, right? You shooting Corey shoots a 6 Dasher. He shoots burger bullets with Varget, and he's using a quality, like single point cut barrel. Like that eliminates so much of your problems. It's not even funny.
Yeah.
Like that's such a forgiving round that like to build a carbon ring in a dasher, something's going, you're probably using Vitavori or something crazy, and yeah, there's a lot of things that have to happen to start running into those issues with super forgiving cartridges.
Right.
But, when I, again, try to, shooting's been around for so long, right? I think PRS, we always think we found like the new cool shiny thing, right? Like, I shoot a lot of positional paper. Like, well, that's in FMs and TM manuals from the Marine Corps from like the 60s and 70s. I'm not, no one's inventing anything new anymore at this point, at least not yet. Or like barrel tuners. I said something about that to my dad. My dad's laughing. He's like, we were using barrel tuners, in the 80s. So like, trying not to reinvent the wheel here. We have a couple, Olympians and Hall of Famers at work that are retired, right? Like older civilians that work for us now. And I was talking with one of them, and I asked him, I was like, "Hey, so what's your thought on barrel cleaning?" And he's like, "Well, it's not my thought, but what the record books will tell you is that no record has ever been set by a barrel that has been over triple digits since it's been cleaned." And that's bench rest and F-class stuff, which is like the pinnacle of
Right.
accuracy and precision. And so that just kind of always stuck with me. And when I, like I said, when I started PRS, and Bruce told me that, he's like, barrels are cut and developed to be at their best when they're clean. That's how they're designed. So it was just always kind of stuck with me. And to me, it's cheap insurance, right? Like,
Yeah.
and I was telling somebody this the other day when we were talking about barrel cleaning stuff. So let's use Corey as an example, right? He shoots his rifle 2,700 rounds, and then it either dies, catastrophic failure, something, whatever happens, it happens, right? And let's say he gets the next barrel and does that, right? So let's say you're 5,000 rounds deep. Well, Corey now has only 2 experiences with his barrel and how it behaves at certain round counts, right? Now, let's say I clean my barrel every 400 rounds. Okay. My barrel dies at, 2,500-ish rounds. Okay. That's fine. And I go through 2 barrels just like Corey did. But instead, I got 5 experiences off both of those barrels at how they behaved at different round counts. So I have 10 repetitions at that life cycle. Now, let's say I clean my barrel every time I shoot it. So 150 rounds or less is safe to say. Well, now out of every barrel, I'm getting 20-ish repetitions at the life cycle of what happens between clean and 100 or 150 rounds. So like I tell guys, maybe it's fine to 400, maybe it's fine to 500 or 600, but I will never know. But I know damn sure it is fine between clean and 150 or 200, and I keep it there because it's predictable. So that's kind of how I like to look at it. I think that makes sense to me.
It's smart. Yeah, it's cheap insurance, like you said.
Yeah. But yeah, we could talk about barrel cleaning till we're blue in the face, you know.
Yeah, no, but that's solid. Okay, I've got two more things for you. We'll wrap
Sure.
up.
Yeah.
So one of the points you made, talking to Phil, you were talking about the stage at the finale with the picnic table by the pond was the
Yeah.
uh, big pan, and that you saved that the wind completely changed on you, dropped a few shots, but you're proud because you dropped a few shots instead of being a trainer. And you
Yeah.
said, I don't want to misphrase it, but shooting the difference between shooting offensively and shooting defensively. Can you
Yes.
explain that and
Yeah.
and like what is that and how did that come into play?
So again, like I know I reference like combative sports and stuff a lot, but that's kind of where I learned a lot about myself and life and stuff. But we used to say like both as a metaphor and physically, when somebody's on their heels or their rearward, when you're on your heels in any situation, right, and you're backpedaling, you're defensive at that point. You're not no longer trying to win, you're just trying to survive. And it actually is a reference or a metaphor that has to do with how your brain works. And I should give credit to where I learned this, but I honestly can't remember. It's been a while. Um, but actually, I've read more than one source. Then Adam Robinson, he's a shooter out of East Texas. His wife's actually an Olympian. She shot the 10-meter air rifle positional stuff, if I remember correctly. And he had talked about it as well, that when we say stay frontal, right, you're using your frontal cortex, which is like your problem solving ability, which means you're staying cognitive and it means you're staying in it. Whereas when you watch people, right, that hit that fight or flight, the fight or flight mode and portion of your brain that works is actually in the rear. So when people get to the rearward, they automatically hit an autopilot and now they're on cruise control, meaning like you no longer really have that much control because you're not making a conscious thought, you're making a subconscious or a kind of auto response to a problem, if that makes sense. So if I ever miss, right, in a match, well, I mean, I miss all the time, but when I miss, it takes more time. We always say misses cost you time more than hits do, right? Because when you see a hit, it's just rinse and repeat, hit, rinse and repeat. When you miss, it's time killer because you now have a problem. And what I see a lot of times with people is when they miss and I hear their cadence and their cadence is equal to or faster than the previous shot that they were hitting, I now know they're in a panic mode, right? Because you'll watch people get panicked. And when they're panicked, they like try and try and try and try and try. Like there was one recently, and I'm not like throwing shade at anybody, but
Right.
if somebody wants to look it up, a good example of this was Eric Cortina does like some kind of like KYL type video thing I saw on YouTube the other night when I was
Yeah.
hanging out, and Derek Webster shot it, and it didn't go very well for Derek Webster. Actually, no, I'm misquoting myself. It wasn't that one that Derek did. It was there's some guy in Texas that does like
Yeah, it's
a
the Texas planking, like
yes,
one MOA at 1,000.
that's
That Derek
exactly
did.
it's Texas plinking. It's what it's called.
Yeah.
Okay, I just want to make sure I'm giving credit to the right place. Sorry, not Eric's. The Texas plinking, correct?
Yeah, no, the
Um,
meme, the second meme following up making fun of Derek was off of Eric Cortina's deal, and someone screenshot it at a bad time. But yes.
yeah,
Anyway,
and like yeah, I like Derek. Derek runs a great company out of Texas called
yeah.
DI Precision. So shout out to Derek. I'm not just throwing shade at you, man, but if you saw his Texas plinking video, that I would venture to say that Derek, as a professional shooter, would agree that that's the definition of a train wreck. And if you watch that video, listen to his shooting cadence. There's a frustration point that hits when he starts shooting faster.
Mm.
And instead of trying to cognitively solve the problem, he's just trying to fix it quickly. And we see that a lot with people, right? Like fighting, where if they get in a bad spot, instead of cognitively solving the problem. They try and do it with anger, brute force, strength. They just try and they want to get out of that problem. So for me, staying offensive when I shoot is incredibly important. So I have like a mantra that if I miss, I tell myself pin pause measure. So I pin the trigger to the rear. I pause to let my brain process what I saw, and I physically force myself to use the reticle in front of my eye, use that ruler and measure where was it from where it's at to there and why was it there? Because there's always a why, right? Like, a lot of people say believe the bullet or whatever you want to say, believe the target stuff. But, there's a reason the bullet went where it went and why is it? Well, I would venture to say that if some shooters had missed the shot that I missed, an auto response would have been maybe I jerked it, maybe I did this, maybe I did that. And it takes a lot of repetitions, right, to build that confidence or that kind of internal arrogance to where you say, that wasn't me. I shot a great shot, right? I have enough reps that I need to trust that. And when I teach a lot of the military dudes, right, I have a saying that I say, a good miss is better than a bad hit any day of the week. Because with a good miss, I have trustable information that I can use.
Right.
When I have a bad hit, it's like, okay, well, that's fantastic that I hit it, but now I don't know what I need to replicate.
Right.
So I try and always have, if I miss, I want a good miss, right? That can hopefully fix that. Well, I would venture to say that if some people miss that, their first response would have been, maybe I jerked it. Maybe I did this. Maybe I did something. Whereas I try and say, okay, it was a good shot. I did everything right. I saw where it went. Why did it go there? And, it's like, okay, well, I immediately saw where it went. And I was like, well, that's pretty far off. That's almost not in the same area code. So, I pull my magnification back or I'll try and find hard lines. Top of the targets work real well. Top of the vehicles, if they're on the range, top of the berms work real well. You can see mirage there much easier than you can in like a monotonous background, like a hayfield. Yeah. So I immediately pan up to the hill above it where I can see the edge of the grass skylined and I can see mirage there a lot better. And sure as shit, it was not going the same direction that I had planned for. So it's like, okay, cool, checks out. I can trust what I saw now. Now let's fix the problem. So I think if you watch my shooting cadence when I miss, as long as I'm doing everything like I want to, my misses are longer because I am trying to make sure that it's almost like an intentional delay to make sure that I'm thinking here and not there, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. Yeah.
And it's tough though, right? It's tough.
It is.
Like
it's hard to do.
Yeah, like sitting here over, this podcast, I'm sure everyone's like, oh man, that's brilliant. Like, he's got it figured out. And then you watch me shoot the next match and you miss, you're like, fuck. And all of a sudden, you're like, just start throwing rounds at it. Like it doesn't always go like that, but I think as many times as we can replicate that in training, the better. So I'm a big fan of trying to create train wrecks in training. I feel like that's really where I figure stuff out. So
how would you create a train wreck training?
Okay, that's a good question. So, for example, I got some close buddies that I work with here out of Benning that are with they're some of the Special Operations Rangers, and they're getting ready for USASOC, which is the United States Special Operations Command Sniper Competition. So I'm working with them, trying to help them out. It's actually one of them was my gap grind am. He's a stud, dude shoots his ass off, and his partner is phenomenal as well. So it's great working with them, but I create drills that I use with them and I jump in training with them. So the three of us will just kind of rotate through. And a big one that I do is a blind turret drill. So what I'll normally do is I kind of have a crawl, walk, run progression to most things that I try and do because I want sequential building blocks that will start at a workable level to build confidence and understand the concept and then work into a very hard point to where it's not unachievable, but they're going to need a lot of work to get there. And that way, you kind of have you don't have a cap on your growth. Well, what we'll do is I'll normally start with a target at like 500 to 600, depending on your caliber. And the reason being is that when you get to closer targets are harder to read than further targets. because further targets, you have more hang time. It's a longer time of flight. You have more recovery time. You can see more. Close targets, like, you go 350 and in with a 6 mil, that's tough
Yeah.
because you got to be perfect and stay in the gun. So I normally start 5 to 600. Most time we're shooting 308s or something like that. And what we'll do is I'll pick a target with a berm or a readable backdrop, and we'll do blind turret drills. So normally my rule is width of the target. So if we're shooting a 2-minute target, right, you can go 6/10 left, right, up or down. And again, if we're starting with a very crawl portion of this, I will say, 6/10 left or right.
Yeah.
And you can go 3, you can go whatever, and you still start with your wind call the way you would, and you're gonna miss. And then you have to make a decision. Spot, okay, pin, pause, measure, drag and drop, copy and paste, whatever you want to say, get that second round impact. And normally what we'll do is after you get 3 or so second round impacts in a row, which is perfect, move on. You kind of go to the next phase of that. The next phase of that, I normally will implement elevation error as well. Like, I try not to do the elevation error all the time, because in PRS, you should trust your elevation, right? You should trust that your system is perfect. But I will implement that, so same thing, kind of that 2 to 3, second round impacts, move on. And then the next phase of that, I will normally move it closer, 300 or 400 yards, maybe 3 or 350, to where that flash to bang is a lot quicker. So you got to stay in the gun, fundamentally be more sound. Okay, I saw where that was. I got it, drag and drop. And then the next phase I do is I do skyline targets, a target with no berm. And then what that forces you to do is that you have to have a plan at that point where, okay, like part of the military solving process, we have what we call the PACE plan, right? So you have a primary, alternate, contingency, and emergency. So for every plan you start with, you have 4 courses of action. For PRS, I cut it down to 3, P, A, and an E. I have my primary plan, my alternate plan, and my emergency. Because we don't really have the rounds to afford to, have that many different types of planning errors. But for my primary, obviously, it would be whatever my wind call is. My alternate is normally always a full wind bracket or target with minus 1/10 of a mil into the wind, strong. And then my E is normally always going to the post. So find dirt, go to the base of the target. That way, no matter what, if I can solve that problem in 3 rounds, I prevent catastrophic failure,
Yeah.
But so that's what I like to do. That's kind of my process or my drill, because we've all been there, right? There's nothing worse than when you break that shot and hear nothing, see nothing, no call. And it's like now what,
Right.
and I think you need to have a plan. Because when people don't have a plan, you'll hear them go boom, 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 and that cadence picks up, because at that point, they're panicking, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, kind of a long-winded answer, but
No,
that's
that was really good.
yeah.
Okay, so then the last thing I got for you, so it's obvious from what you do for a living and the speech that you made, but you were a sniper, and it comes across that you're very passionate about the sniper community. How can we get more snipers involved in this sport? And or I guess, let me, before that, do you think being involved in this sport has helped you as far as your lethality and what you can take to the guys that you train?
So to answer the last part of that first, yeah, absolutely.
Okay,
It's changed.
that's what I assume.
Yeah,
And so
it's changed everything.
how do we get more law enforcement and those types of agencies involved in this, to be able to replicate what you're doing for the Army for their departments?
Man, so that's a tough one. Because I think the first kind of hurdle in that situation, right, is a personality thing. You have a lot of guys, myself included, that come from that area, and you're kind of that type A personality, that alpha male complex, whatever you want to call it. And there's an ego attached to that.
Yeah.
And, like we say when we teach, right? Ego's not your amigo. So like the more egotistical you're going to be about things, the less you're going to learn. So it's hard to get guys to that point. And what I've seen is normally one of two things happen. A lot of people from those communities, or like my past life, that have tried PRS, they do one of two things. They either we're all going to get beat the first time we go to a match. That's a given, right? So
Right.
what's going to happen after that is one of two things. You either get your ass kicked and you say, I never want this to happen again. What do I need to do to fix that? Which is the path that I took and many others. Or they say, this is a gimmicky sport. This is bullshit. I'm a sniper. They're not. They're out of shape. They're overweight. Well, if we were running, they can never do this. They like kind of what we talked about before, right? With like your equipment issues or stuff and not taking ownership of those errors. Like you create an out for yourself.
Right.
And I will be the first one to say PRS is a game. It's
Well, yeah.
absolutely a game. It's a game. There's nothing it's a game and I love that game. But to think that you can't find usable things from that to take back to apply to your operational job as a sniper is absolutely ludicrous. And I actually, so I disagree with a lot of instructors on this one, right? So I'm sure, like you've probably heard this, right? When you first were getting into the sport, right, and you were talking about caliber choice, how many times did you get the recommendation, or did people tell you, well, hey, start with a 308? That way, once you learn how to shoot that and you're fundamentally sound, you go to a 6 mil, you'll be awesome, right? A lot of people say that.
Yeah.
I completely disagree. So when you start in PRS with a 20-pound 6 mil with a break on it and this and that, you are shown what perfection is and what right looks like. You establish a baseline of what you should be trying to make that military grade gun look like, right? So when I go and shoot, a 6 mil, and I can see my own trace, I can see this, I can see that. I won't be able to make that, 10-pound 300 Win Mag look the same as what I
Right.
saw, but I at least know what I'm trying to strive for. And I think that's huge.
And
I
if
think
you
that's
started
huge.
on that 10-pound 300 Win Mag trying to do it the other way,
Like when I talk to
a
guys
lot
and I
harder.
mentioned about like, spotting your own impacts, they look at you like you're high. It's like, well, I have a spotter. It's in his name. It's called spotter. That's spotting. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
I was like, guys, I get it. But like, modern warfare and what we're moving towards now is a lot of what we call shooter scenarios, which rather than having, one off the gun and one on the gun spotting, you have two guys on the gun spotting for themselves and spotting for each other, right? Like you're doubling your firepower at that point. And I was big with that, especially with some of my younger guys, like be accountable for all your own rounds, be accountable for your rounds and spotting them. And if your spotter happens to give you a correction that confirms what you saw, that's awesome. But don't rely on him, right? Like it's almost like having insurance for your car, right? You don't have insurance because you plan on wrecking. You have insurance in the case that things don't go how they should have, right?
Yeah.
So, but to get back to that, how do we get more guys involved? Man, that's tough. I think a big one, to be honest with you, is the ego thing, right? Which that will slowly work itself out. So what we're seeing is in a lot of our tier one communities, like a lot of the higher end kind of JSOC units, there's some of them that do shoot PRS. They obviously do it kind of pretty incognito, but they're there,
Yeah.
and they're studs. They're badasses. They know what they're doing, and those guys that have embraced the competition shooting culture, both PRS and 3-gun, right? Almost more so in 3-gun. They're going back to their units and they're mopping the floor with everyone, right? Like they may go to the PRS match and he's shooting 80%, but when he goes back to his unit, I mean, he's king.
Yeah.
So there's only so many times that those type A guys are going to get beat before they figure out how to get better. So I think in a lot of ways, the ego part of it will work itself out. Now, I think this other part of it that we can help with is just the awareness. It's kind of crazy how many law enforcement agencies, sniper units, this, that, they're just they're ignorant. And I don't mean that in a condescending way at all. They just don't know what they don't know. They're
Right.
unaware that a lot of this is a thing. They're unaware of, certain things like, like was that like a pretty high profile training thing not too long ago. And I watched one of the instructors take a game changer, flip it nipples up, and put his rifle in the middle of a game changer nipples up, like on the roof of a car. And it was just one of those where it was kind of like, huh. Well, like, I kind of talked with him after, of course, I wasn't going to skyline him in front of anyone. I talked with him after and I was like, hey, brother, check this out. Like, use, maximize surface area, use the front of that mag well, use the front of that Arca rail, like maximize all that surface area to improve your stability as much as you can. And he was like, oh shit. Like, yeah, man, that's way better. That's awesome. Yeah, thanks. And it's like, okay, so that's not that's not like a cultural problem. That's just a awareness problem. They
Yeah.
literally don't know what they don't know. So, and I have only ever really taught like the military units, right? Because, I work for the Army. But I'm starting to branch out. And this year I've kind of told myself I want to start to get involved with more training stuff. And if Billy Don Kenny's watching this, wherever he's at, he runs a Twisted Barrel Precision. I owe him, I owe him a phone call back. He has some guys that want some training, so I'm going to make an effort to try and get out to some of those guys and to try and help them more, because I think they deserve that. As a professional that's paid to do this by tax dollars, I feel like I owe it to people to do that. But to answer your question again, the ego thing will work itself out. Awareness is a big thing, right? Like if you know that somebody's in that job or that you have a neighbor in that role, maybe try and drag them to a one day or even a range session and just kind of expose them to it. Now, if there are any operational guys out there that are in positions of authority or influence that are listening to this, one thing that I did, and I thought that it was the biggest difference maker that I could, and that if I could make everyone do it, I would do it over and over again. I would make it mandatory, and I damn near did it for my guys. So I was in Texas for a little while, and I kind of grew a great relationship with Texas Precision Matches and Prentice Wink. And what I did was I would take my sniper section, and then normally I would try and like comp on a day on the back end, right? Like maybe take a half day Friday or give them Monday off or something like that. But I would make their appointed place of duty that match, and I would make them RO the match. And Prentice was really good about hooking my guys up, making sure they got taken care of. Like a lot of them, got prize table walks, got binos, tripods, like things they needed for the section that they can't do on, private pay type deal. But
Right.
they RO the matches. And it went exactly how you thought it would. They did it and they're just enamored. They're stoked. They're like, dude, this is bad. What I got to do this. And, two of my kind of original proteges from that, they're both Green Berets now in special forces. So that's what they do now. I have another guy who shoots matches now. He's kind of up in upstate New York. They all have full custom build guns and they're completely sucked into it. And I believe in my heart of hearts that whenever they get, to their groups, sort of, one's going down to seventh group, when he gets behind a long gun down there, he's going to start mopping the floor with people because they started in that culture. So I think if there are operational guys watching and listening to this, like get involved in your local shooting community. Find that local PRS match. Just reach out to the director and say, this is who I am. This is what I have. We truthfully probably don't know shit about fuck, but we're willing to work and we want to help. And man, if that local director isn't willing to help you and isn't like over the moon that he'll have people helping him, like, let one of us know, like I'm sure, you know what I mean? Like I have a hard time believing this community, they won't be super stoked about that. But yeah, I think that was something that I did and they continued to do after I left. And when I left and that continued, that meant a lot to me. I felt like, there was something there or a seed that was planted that was worthwhile. that they're getting involved in that and that they're doing that, and it was great for them too, because there were dudes, like a lot of the good, Texas boys down there that shoot and they get done, the match is over and they're like, hey dude, like, you want to shoot my gun?
Right.
Here's a mag. And yeah, it's a great atmosphere. But truthfully speaking, there's a preconceived notion that when you're a military sniper, you shoot every day. Right. Like, that's obviously not true. The average PRS shooter has, tenfold the amount of rounds under their belt that a lot of these snipers do. So when
Right.
they can go to a match and there's 200 shooters shooting a 10-round stage, they get 2,000 repetitions of watching trace, watching plate impact, watching all that. Like, that's phenomenal training. That's great, and I think that's something that guys can really work towards. But the truth of it is that when I was in, and still into this day, the sniper community will always be it will be a community of contention. It will be a community of controversy. It's just the nature of the job, right? And a lot of people, commanders especially, they're just not fond of them, right? They see them as a flight risk. They don't see them as a force multiplier like they are. But at the end of the day, right, like, if these snipers that are listening, they're in a position of influence, like, you're a salesman to an extent. Your job is to preach to those commanders your capabilities, limitations, and what you can offer him and how you can make him look better because of what you and your team are able to do. So it's on you to be able to talk to him, throw that sales pitch. And I mean, if you can do it well, you'll get a lot of work.
Yeah.
And, when you do it well and you start getting a lot of repeat business, that's good for everyone. But, if the reason I took the time to say that at the finale was, like, I had dinner with Philip Vallejo, then, or, the weekend before or something like that, and we were talking, and it's just, like, for those that don't know, like, the scout sniper community is disbanded. Like, there is no longer a scout sniper school going to be running in the Marine Corps. They're actually doing the actually, I think it's this weekend. Yeah, it's this weekend, or last weekend was the final graduation up in Camp Lejeune. So I mean, it will no longer be a thing. So for the Army to be naive in thinking that they are not closely behind them would be foolish. So it's kind of up to those guys to make sure that they cement their value. So that's kind of why I took the time to say that, because like you said, it is near and dear to my heart. It is where I came from.
Yeah.
That is the community I grew up in. Like, I spent a decade in that community. Like, it's made me a part of who I am. So trust me, I'll be a barricade bench rest, gimmicky shooter like the rest of us, and I love it. But at the end of the day, like, that's where I come from, and it means a lot to me.
That's awesome, man.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I appreciate it. Um, is there anyone that you need to say thanks to or anything like that before we wrap it up?
I always give credit where it's due. Army Marksmanship Unit. They are my sponsor, as my only sponsor technically. They allow me to do what I do, and Scott Peterson took a chance on me by hiring me for this job. So I'm always thankful to him, and for Prentice Wink, as much as he likes to take credit for it. Prentice played a large part in me getting the chance at this job. But really, the only other one that I give a lot of credit to is Joel Russo at Terminus Actions. He's been a big supporter for me. He's a fantastic guy, and I I love their product. I don't know if anyone could ever talk me into shooting something else, but that's about it, man. But I appreciate you, Mike. Thanks for having me on, man. Thanks for reaching out to me and doing these podcasts. Like, I think I was actually talking about it this week. Gossett and I were kind of BS, and I was telling him that I don't think some of the shooters coming up in this sport understand how fortunate they are with the wealth of information that's at their disposal. Free
Crazy.
information. It's like, even if you look at your podcast here that you're doing, or like the Winner Circle, like,
Hmm.
Phil does a podcast where he interviews everyone that has won a match. Like,
Yeah.
people just watch that and listen to what people are saying. We were talking about how good people are becoming and how quickly it's happening. I think a lot of that growth curve is from people like you being selfless, doing these podcasts, doing these information platforms, and getting it to those new shooters. I think that's super important. So I appreciate what you're doing for the
Well,
community. I
thank you, man.
appreciate you having me on.
Well, so part of that, you get to nominate someone to be on the podcast. Can be someone in the military, someone in the shooting industry, a friend. But you get to nominate someone.
Get to nominate someone to be on the podcast. Okay. Have you had Greg Bell on the podcast yet?
I have not.
So I would like to nominate Greg Bell because he
Okay.
is the president of the IPRF now. Or excuse
Yep.
me, it's the USPRA, which is the
Yeah.
United States Precision Rifle Association, which is the American entity falling under the IPRF umbrella.
Yeah.
But Greg is busting his ass and doing phenomenal things for this country for that match. I know, he texted me today, actually, getting some contact info for sponsors and other stuff. So I think giving him a platform to kind of like maybe raise awareness for the IPRF would be fantastic because for those that don't know, it was supposed to be in South Africa and it's actually going to be in Grand Junction, Colorado.
Yep.
So it had to do with the political climate, some instability and stuff like that down in South Africa. But it's going to be here. And I think that's huge and important. And so if they could, I haven't said anything to them, but I'll call out the shooter's mindset. Like, I think everyone can agree the coverage they did of the AG Cup was
Oh,
like,
it's so cool.
dude, it was unreal. It was
Yeah.
unreal. And I had no idea until, the dust had settled and I had come home. My dad was watching it. He's like, man, he's like, I can't believe they were able to do that. It was awesome. And I watched it because he was talking about my shots and, everyone talks about where you miss. No one ever talks about the ones you hit, because he's like, what happened on this one? I was like, well, how did you know I even missed there? He's like, have you seen the videos? So whatever the shooter's mindset, what they did, Greg, that was awesome. So like if they could, get something like that going for the IPRF or something like that, like just
Yeah.
getting Greg on here to like let people know what's going on. Like, even if people don't want to, if they've missed the chance to, because I know the teams have already been announced for that, but even RO help out, just be a part of it. I think it potentially could turn into something big, right? Because this is essentially becoming our Olympics, right?
Right.
So I'll nominate Greg for that one because I think he's
Okay.
doing awesome things and deserves some notoriety for that.
I agree. I freaking love Greg Bell. Yeah, he is a pretty selfless human being for as much shit as he's taken on to get all that.
Oh yeah, he is, and I owe a whole lot to that man. I shot my very first 1 day or my very first 2 day national match in 2021. It's the Luke Steel Classic, and I was squatted with Greg Bell. I had no idea who anyone was like in the sport, to be frank. And I
Yeah.
shot my first match with him, and we had talked after that, and he was the first person that ever told me. He said, I believe you're going to win a golden bullet if you keep at this. It's the first person ever told me that. So I owe a
Hell
lot
yeah.
to Greg and our friendship. Yeah. But
Good. Well, awesome, man. Well, seriously, thank you so much for being on, and we'll stay in touch and
yeah, absolutely, man.
see it some matches.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's whenever Ken decides to post the AG schedule, we'll schedule it. I'm
Yeah,
just
I
kidding,
know.
Ken.
I'm trying to get my schedule for next year going, and I'm starting to shoot NRL Hunter next year too, and so I'm trying to balance between those two series and a couple matches outside of both of them. And I haven't had time to sit down, and then now all of a sudden there's like 7 matches that are open for registration. I'm just like, shit, I haven't even figured out which ones I'm going to.
Yeah, I know. It gets chaotic. Yeah. The NRL Hunter ones are cool if you haven't done those.
I
They're kind of,
haven't. We sponsored them. We were sponsored for them this year, and I'm gonna start shooting it this year. And I can't. I've got my barreled action, and then my stock should be here in a couple weeks, and
nice.
finishing everything out. So I can't freaking wait. I'm looking forward to
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, they're good. I've shot 2 of them and they're good, but I'm actually, we're going to, T-Pain and I are going to kind of be dipping our toes back into the team realm. We're kind of thinking at making a run back at like some of the big military sniper matches and stuff if we can get invited back to them. I think
Yeah,
that's something we're going to pursue. Yeah, so we're going to start with some NRL Hunter stuff and some other stuff, but I'll be sure. But we'll be doing the team division.
hell yeah. Well,
Yeah, it should
awesome,
be a
man.
good time. Yeah,
Well, cool. Well, I appreciate it, and talk to you soon.
yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Mike.